Welcome, everybody, whether you are here or zooming in, to this evening's session of the workshop in the history of material texts. As most of you know, I'm Jerry Singerman, formerly humanities editor at the University of Pennsylvania Press, and one of the current conveners of the workshop, along with Zach Lesser, the Edward W. Kane Professor of English at Penn, and John Pollock, from whom we've just heard, curator for research services here at the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books, and Manuscripts. We're supported in all our efforts, as always, by Peter Diamond of the Penn English Department and the Bristol Schoenberg Fellow in the History of Material Texts. Peter's responsibilities are many, but are manifested in this room by the attendance sheet that he has started circulating. So please do fill in your name as it reaches you. And if you're not already on our listserv, of course, and would like to be, add your email coordinates. For those of you who are zooming in, actually, you owe everything to Peter because you would not be here at all were it not for the tech support that he offers. Now, it comes as something of a shock that next week's presentation is already the last of the semester, but I hope that many of you will be able to join us when Tim Hogue of the Penn Religious Studies Department continues our mini theme on textual substrates by asking, what were the Ten Commandments really written on? A catalog of ancient Levantine material texts. And I encourage you all to mark your calendars for January 27th, when we will reconvene with a presentation by Brent Seals of the University of Kentucky on the use of advanced computer imaging technology and AI to decipher the contents of the burnt scrolls recovered from the Villa dei Papiri at Herculaneum. But tonight, I'm very pleased to welcome Thomas Reiner of the University of Basel. Thomas studied art history and ancient history at the universities of Freiburg im Breisgau and Innsbruck, and received his doctorate from that latter institution in 2008. From that year until 2018, he was curator at the Bayerische Verwaltung der staatlichen Schlösser, Gärten und Seen, the Bavarian administration of state-owned palaces, gardens, and lakes, or as it's known more briefly, the Bavarian Palace Department, with particular oversight of the 18th century UNESCO World Heritage Margraville Opera House at Bayreuth. And I hope that Thomas will allow us to fantasize about this for a bit, because you have to admit that it sounds pretty fabulous, especially to somebody who has spent his entire career at a university press. In any event, things get much more relatable once we leave the Palace Department behind. Because from 2020 on, Thomas was a research fellow at the Swiss National Science Foundation research project, Textures of Sacred Scripture at the University of Zurich, where he coordinated the material analytical studies on dyes, pigments, and metal inks in Carolingian and Ottonian manuscripts. Earlier this year, he moved to Basel, where he is the managing director and program coordinator of ICONIS, the Center for the Theory and History of the Image. He is an authority on the really extraordinarily beautiful Carolingian and Ottonian manuscripts that are written on purple grounds, and he's currently finishing a monograph on that topic. Other areas of scholarly focus include praxeologies of medieval book, techniques of surface refinement and polishing, the materials and semantics of sacred scripture and images, transcultural exchange processes of Jewish and Christian book cultures, and the image of the codex and scroll in Jewish and Christian art, the subject of a new book project. All of which leads me to ask how it is that he's only now presenting to our group for the first time. But speaking of firsts, while I have not gone through the extant list of every presentation that has ever been made to this group over the course of its much vaunted 30-plus year history, I am fully prepared to go out on a limb to assert that we have never yet had a talk on fingernails. So the time has at last come, and I, for one, am much relieved. Please join me then, without further delay, in welcoming Thomas Reiner, speaking this evening on polished nails and polished parchment, Nägel-seax, scraping knives, and the perfection of writing in Insular and Carolingian manuscripts.
Well, thank you so much for this generous introduction. And I have to say, from the palace department to fingernails is quite a step. I thank Zachary Lesser and Jerry Singerman, John Bollock, and especially Peter Diamond for organizing this event and for inviting me to speak here, which is really a great honor. And I have to thank Peter Stellebras, who is, I think, responsible that I will speak here. It is so nice to see in the audience many friends like Nick Herman, who was recently in Basel. This workshop will be about medieval nail art. Unfortunately, not the practical part you see in this beautiful image, but a more theoretical reflection inspired by nail polish, poetry, and art. This topic has rarely been explored for the Middle Ages, but it is at the forefront of contemporary feminist, queer, and post-colonial literature theory. In her short story, The Grey Day, published in 1927 in the collection The Left Bank, and Other Stories, Shin Riz pictured with a certain degree of irony the difficulties of poetic inspiration in modern-day Paris. On a cold, cloudy day in spring, a day without joy or romance or tenderness, and I quote, "The poet walked solemnly along the Boulevard Raspail and longed for the sight of a pretty woman, a useless creature with polished nails, expensive scent, and the finest of silk stockings, marked and warranted for ornament fragile." Three commodities of the contemporary beauty commerce characterize this longed-for muse: perfume, silk, and nail polish. A fitting inspiration for Riz's poet is found among the advertisements of the October 1928 issue of the American fashion magazine Delineator. Here, I quote, "bewitching author of Gentlemen Prefer Blondes," Anita Loos, who published her new success, But Gentlemen Marry Brunettes, in 1928, shows her delicately groomed hand with perfectly polished nails. The product touted by the author's left is the new Cutix liquid polish, a nail polish used by the sophisticated Parisienne, as another Cutix ad, the leading American nail care producer of its day, claimed in 1926. The trappings of polished nails and writing, useless ornament, and the art of poetry will be at the center of this paper. However, I will not focus on 20th and 21st century nail polish and the related products of the beauty industry. I will look instead at authors' hands in a much earlier period. In two closely related manuscripts from the 8th and the early 9th century, the Cutbercht Gospels and the Codex Millenarius Major, the authors of Christianity's most sacred texts are pictured with polished nails. Neither the blonde Mark nor the bluish gray-haired Luke need to be ashamed when they compare their perfectly groomed fingertips with the Cutix polished nails of the modern author and the sophisticated Parisienne. Mark and Luke are not alone with their stunning nail care. Every one of the four evangelists portrayed in the Codex Millenarius Major has polished nails, not only on the right and the left hand in intimate contact with the written text and in rhetoric gestures, but also on the toes of their sandal-clad feet. And here we have the polished toenails. The same is true for the four evangelists depicted in the slightly earlier Cutbercht Gospels, the portraits of which are inspired by the same late antique models transmitted by a source manuscript common to the illuminators of both gospel books. And here you have a comparison of the Cutbercht Gospels, Matthew, with the Codex Millenarius, Major Matthew, and you see that there is a common source, and they are intimately linked. Whereas the artist of the slightly later Codex Millenarius highlighted the nails by coloring them silver, which over the course of time oxidized in shades of blacks or was partly erased, showing the green ground of the silver coating, thereby losing the original reflective quality. The artist of the Cutbercht Gospels, who used a less brilliant color palette, emphasized their exceptional shape. Nearly all fingernails are shown elongated, sharpened, and filed. A dark line drawing marks their contour and contrasts the light grayish blue of the nails with the skin tone of the overall hand. Until now, this stunning depiction of polished silver-coated nails in the Codex Millenarius, Major, and filed nails in the Cutbercht Gospels has gone unnoticed. I have to say there is one notice by Nies, but only a small footnote. As said, medieval nail art has rarely been the subject of scholarly analysis, and only recently practical experiments reinvigorated the interest in this subject. This is true not only for the depiction of nails in manuscripts, but also for their discussion in medieval literary and poetic sources. On a broader level, the relationship between cosmetic practices and the ornament of scripture has long been neglected. The silence on this theme stands in contrast to the quite extensive debates dedicated to cosmetics and writing, as well as nails and art in the literature of Latin antiquity and its scholarly reflections. Here we have another one from the Cutbercht Gospels. In a groundbreaking article published in 1999, Armand J. Dangour analyzed the Horatian verses to be found in Ars Poetica 291 to 294. Sons of Pompilius, meant by this are the Latin poets, condemn that poem which many a day and many an erasure has not pruned and whittled down and chastened tenfold to the nail. The dictum ends with the curious expression ad unguem, which already elicited the curiosity of ancient commentators. Horace uses the same phrase in a less poetologically charged context in Satires 1:5 to characterize the Roman senator Fonteius Capito as a perfectly refined gentleman. Fonteius ad unguem factus homo, which literally translated means a man made to the nail. Citing a variant of the metaphor first formulated by the Roman poet Persius, half a century after the death of Horace, a late antique scholiast commonly referred to as Pseudo-Ekron noted the following explanation of the dictum. Ad unguem, a phrase taken from the marble workers who test for joins in the marble with their fingernails. Elsewhere, we find ad unguem factum homo. Ad unguem therefore means, and this is all in the quote, to perfection, to the test, that is, to the final measure of judgment. As Dangour has noted, this explanation is less than obvious. It requires a great leap of imagination to connect the nail as the critical tool of the marble worker, judging the perfect smoothness of the surface of joined stones with the refinement of poetry, or more generally, with the refinement of a particularly cultured person. Dangour therefore argues that the scholiast's explanation, which alludes to Perseus, is secondary to the metaphor Horace originally had in mind when he coined the phrase in the context of his poetological reflections. In a general sense, nails on fingertips and toes could signify the ultimate limit of the extremities of the human body. In Latin and in Greek, there was an equivalent to the modern English proverb from tip to toe, or in the Swiss German vernacular, tip top, meaning perfect. In reference to the nails, Cicero phrases ab imis unguibus usque ad verticem sumum, which means essentially the same as the aforementioned English saying. Nails as ultimate limit and finish of the members of the body also had a special place in the aesthetic discussion of beauty, perfection, and artistic mastery. Here the work process in finishing a sculpture, either of cast bronze or made of marble, comes to the mind. The work of the file, lime labor, mentioned in Ars Poetica 1 verse above the ad unguem quote. The file is of utmost importance to understand the development of the poetic nail metaphor. It could refer to both to the refinement of the artistic work, but also to the refinement of its author. In late antiquity, this laudatory topos was often used to characterize the refinement of language. It gained new strength by comparing classical Latin to the vulgar dialects spoken by the common people in the provinces and the new elites with the barbaric language as their mother tongue. In 5th century Gaul, Sidonius Apollinaris writes to his friend Hesperius, "The Latin language should be cleaned from the rust of barbarism in the street and thereby saved from extinction. Otherwise, all the purples," and he explicitly uses the plural, "of noble speech would be decolorized through the negligence of the common people." He continues to mention the instrument of choice against such debasement of the tongue, a file sharpened by the whetstone of continuous exercise. It was Ennodius, a great admirer of the eloquence of Gaul, who in the beginning of the 6th century reinvigorated the old metaphor ad unguem in the context of this late antique polishing of Latin speech. In the letters and writings of this learned churchman, rhetorician, and poet who undertook diplomatic missions in the service of the Ostrogothic court in Ravenna and in 513 became Bishop of Pavia, the expression is used no less than 11 times, more than in the writings of any other author in Latin antiquity. He frequently praises the eloquence of his correspondents who mastered the elegance in Latin speech. To his friend Firmius, he writes, his letters reminded him that the splendor of perfectly refined speech, literally, speech polished to the nail, ad unguem politis sermonis splendore, glistens forth when eloquence preserves the riches with the bridle of expertise. With the same vocabulary, the union of nobility and rhetoric perfection is invoked in a letter to Ennodius' noble-born pupil Johannes. See how much merit a perfectly polished discourse, literally a discourse polished to the nail, ad unguem polita conversatione, lends to the virtues of the well-born man, how the radiance of his noble blood was surpassed by the diligence in chastening. By doing so, Ennodius succeeds in combining two opposing rhetorical forces. Through polishing, a jeweled style could radiate the brilliance of castigated language. With this late antique reappraisal of the Horatian metaphor ad ungues factum homo, for a perfect character, or to cite once again the scholiast, probably a contemporary of Ennodius, something or someone polished to perfection, to the test, to the final measure of judgment, find an echo in the pictorial tradition. If ever there were author portraits that represented Sidonius and Ennodius' idol of Latin splendor ad unguem politus, they are the three author portraits in the late 5th or early 6th century Vergilius Romanus, a manuscript probably produced in Roman Gaul at the same time when Sidonius wrote his letters. The portraits show the Roman poet par excellence as a pubescent boy dressed in glaring white linen with purple stripes. He has precisely cut back hair, is clean shaven, and with a smooth waxen skin that mixes lead white and purple red, a combination of skin tones comparable to the one described by Sidonius when lauding the barber who cuts back the sprouting hair of the barbarian king Theodosius. When we take a close look at the poet's hands holding a purple covered scroll, a distinctive metaphor for the splendor and riches of noble speech, we recognize the same combination of purple reddish and white skin tones which distinguish the adolescent's face. The tips of the elongated fingers are highlighted by white flashes on the nails, sharpened to a point, a color trait which also characterizes his toes with distinctly white nails. Are these highlighted nails of the ancient poet, which Virgil shares with the Olympian gods, depicted in the same manuscript, precursors to the polished nails of the early medieval evangelists? There is a long-standing scholarly tradition that has compared every pose of the early medieval evangelist portraits to the ancient author portraits, but it has rarely been studied how these connections affected the body care in the images of the Christian writers of sacred text. If we parallel the image of John in the Cutbercht Gospels with the beautiful poet boy in the Vergilius Romanus, and look closely at the delicately filed nails holding the scroll, it becomes clear that ignoring the cosmetics of the author misses a crucial point of comparison. One exception in the scholarly literature to date has been Michelle Brown's thought-provoking study titled Bearded Czars and Beautiful Boys, in which she took a close look at the different facial hairstyles in insular portraits of the evangelists. Her reflection on the evangelists in the Lindisfarne Gospels, based on her previous monograph of this manuscript, is especially relevant in our context. The clean-shaven faces of Mark and John that echo the Roman style of a carefully groomed poet, like the pubescent boy in the Vergilius Romanus, stand in marked contrast to the bearded Luke and Matthew, whose beard and hairstyle continue the tradition of the ancient Greek philosopher's portrait, represented by uncut, carelessly grown long hair. The play with markedly different styles that are incorporated in the overall harmony of the Gospels is, as has been shown by Brown, a characteristic element of the Lindisfarne Gospels, which emphasized throughout its composition the orthodox unity of different church traditions, Celtic, Latin, and Greek, not only in images, but also in letters and script. Indeed, in this sense, the contrast between the different hairstyles could not only be interpreted on Christological grounds, but also as the perfect harmony of literary styles, letters, and languages. The rough Greek style of the philosopher is combined with the smooth Latin poet boy. From the hairstyle of the Lindisfarne Gospels, we now turn to the Cutbercht Gospels and the Codex Millenarius with their stunning nail care. I show you first in a fast sequence the evangelist portraits from the Cutbercht Gospels, and please note the different hairstyles on the respective evangelists, similar to the Lindisfarne Gospels. So first comes Matthew with long grayish blue hair, then a beautiful boy, Mark, with tonsured hair and a close-shaved beard. Then once again, Luke with long grayish hair, and you have John, who ends this series, once again, the beautiful Latin boy. Indeed, in the milieu of the production of the Cutbercht Gospels, late antique models from northern Italy heavily influenced the depiction of the evangelists. But while the Lindisfarne Gospel was produced in northern England in the beginning of the 8th century, the Cutbercht Gospels was written by an insular scribe in Salzburg in the late 8th century, a city dominated by the Irish bishop Virgil, who was close to the Bavarian Duke Tassilo and his wife Luitpirch. Luitpirch was a Longobard princess from Bavaria in northern Italy, exactly the city where Ennodius taught in the 6th century. A similar cultural mix is found in the Codex Millenarius, produced a few years later than the Cutbercht Gospels, around 800, at the monastery of Mondsee near Salzburg, probably also by a patron close to Tassilo's court. It adapts the same late antique model as the Cutbercht Gospels. The blending of styles is echoed in the gospel harmony, in the combination of the different facial hairstyles of the authors. Here you see the evangelist portraits of the Codex Millenarius, which follow the same model than the Cutbercht Gospels. And once again, you should note the different hairstyles. Mark, this beautiful Latin boy. Then you have Luke with the Greek long-haired hairstyle, grayish, and John, blonde hair, clean shaven. Indeed, the unique introductory image of the canon tables in the Cutbercht Gospels provides a singular clue to the interpretation of the cosmetics of its sacred authors. On the first folio of the canon tables, we see them depicted as bust-length figures, each above the column with the numbered verses of their respective gospel, framed by an arch pairing 2 of the 4 evangelists on each side of the table. Each pair is characterized by the same differentiation in hairstyling on head and face. Matthew and Luke are shown as in the one-page author portraits, old and bearded with long gray hairs, the same Greek philosopher style that was used to characterize the evangelists in the Lindisfarne Gospel. Mark and John are well-groomed youths, blonde shaven, John clean shaven, Mark with a close-shaven blonde beard and tonsured, similar to the beautiful boys representing these evangelists in the Lindisfarne Gospels. These unequal couples, on the one hand long bearded, on the other hand closely shaved, long-haired and tonsured, young and old, gray and blonde, together hold an open codex. The singular joint of its 2 halves is exactly or fairly exactly above the middle line that separates the columns with the gospel quotes on either side. The outstretched fingers of the right and left hand of the 2 evangelists with pointing nails reach out towards the joint of the book, forming a bridge that is demonstrating with the test of the nails the perfect union and the smooth joining of its different halves. This image has no immediate parallel in any other late antique Insular or Carolingian canon table, but it makes perfect sense considering the ad ungues tradition. The late antique scholiast, commenting on Perseus, asserted that joints are perfect when they are tested to the nail, meaning not only marble joints, which are shown without any gap in the marble-derived ornamentation of the canon tables, but also joints of verses. The poetic harmony test is here applied to different styles, to the different styles of Matthew and Mark, as well as Luke and John, suspending a conflict inherent in the poetic nail metaphor. Whereas poets such as Perseus had contrasted the rough and uncombed style of Attic Greece to smooth and sumptuous Roman pretenders, the Greek philosopher and later anchorite is here joined together with the monastic, clean-shaven Latin poet boy and cleric. Polished nails are no longer the exclusive attribute of one literary tradition contrasted to the other, but a sign of perfect harmony. Indeed, all full-page portraits of the evangelists in the Cutbercht Gospels, no matter if they are depicted in the Greek philosopher style, Matthew and Luke, that you can see here, or as Latin clerics and beautiful boys, Mark and John, show distinctly filed and polished fingernails. The same is true for the analogous portraits in the Codex Millenarius. Here you see the parallel between Matthew in the Cutbercht Gospels and Matthew in the Codex Millenarius, and John in the Cutbercht Gospels and Mark in the Codex Millenarius. It is interesting to compare these depictions to a catalogue of luxury items criticized by the insular bishop and writer Adhelm when attacking clerical vanity, both female and male. In his famous treatise, De Virginitate, originally addressed to the abbess and nuns of the double monastery at Barking at the turn of the 7th century, and later disseminated by insular missionaries in Bavaria in the 8th century, he writes, I quote, "This sort of glamorization for either sex consists in fine linen shirts, in scarlet or blue tunics, in necklines embroidered with silk. Their shoes are trimmed with red dyed leather. The hair of their forelocks and curls at their temples are crimped with a curling iron. Dark gray veils for the head give way to bright-colored headdresses, which are sewn with interlacing ribbons and hang down as far as the ankles. And now, fingernails are sharpened after the manner of falcons or hawks, or more properly, to the likeness of the night owl, whom the innate need for food naturally incites to pursue and attack with cruelty small mice and birds with the curved trident of their feet and the ravenous grappling hook of their talons." Adhelm's furor is directed against the same luxury zones, which are highlighted by gilded and silver decoration in our portraits of the evangelists. The hem of the clothes, body beautification from tip to toe, especially the polished and sharpened nails, which are linked to the beastly claws of falcons and night owls in Adhelm's critique. This rhetoric is inverted in the evangelist portraits of the Codex Millenarius by association with scripture. In this context, it is particularly revealing to compare the beauty traits of the evangelists' bodies to their beasts. It is obvious that the shining blonde hair of Mark and John, deliberately arranged in curls at the forelocks and temples, is echoed in the blonde mane and the fur of the lion and the similar, also a little bit darker colored feathers of the eagle for John. The same link exists between the claws of the beasts and the evangelist's fingernails. Like the gilded teeth of the lion and the beak of the eagle, the claws of the lion and the eagle were probably intended to be silvered, as is shown by small remains of oxidated silver on the light green ground of the animal claws. The same green ground used for the silvering in the framing arches and the decoration of the sacred writings. The claws of the eagle and the lion are extremely sharpened. These curved weapons do not attack with cruelty mice and birds, to cite once again Adhelm's critique, but grab the books of sacred scripture. The claws of the book-clutching beasts thereby echo the polished and filed nails of the evangelists, touching their writings with sharpened fingernails. With this linking of sharpened nails, beastie claws, and sacred writing, the portraits of the evangelists in the Codex Millenarius do not stand alone. Two of the evangelists in the Cutbercht Gospels, Mark and John, are also shown close to their respective beasts, whose claws with extremely sharpened claws clutch the codices of sacred writing. A similarly sharpened nail or talon can be seen in the depiction of John in an Irish pocket gospel book from the beginning of the 9th century. In the Mac Durnan Gospels, the piercing extension at the extremity of the body does not belong to the claw of a beast, but to the instrument extending the rider's hand. It is a quill with a fish-like tail and a claw-like head that dives in the red-colored inkwell, giving the impression of an additional finger with an elongated, sharpened nail pointing downwards, a gesture related to the downwards pointing nail of Matthew's left in the portrait of this evangelist in the Codex Millenarius. How sharpened nail, quill, and claw are linked to writing is demonstrated by the second instrument that we can discern in John's portrait in the Mac Durnan Gospels. John holds a closed book with his left hand and simultaneously an oversized knife. Knives were used for two tasks by medieval scribes: to sharpen their quills and to polish the writing surface, either to clean it from faults in the parchment, e.g. hair, or from faults in the text by erasing letters. In medieval Latin, cultellus, knife, and novacula, razor, the same instruments that were used by barbers to cut and sharpen nails could also designate writing instruments, which were used either to sharpen the horn of the quill or to erase faulty letters and words by scratching them from the surface of the parchment. The work of the file, labor lime, which was annotated in the Horatian Scholia of Pseudo-Acron, id est expolitionis et emendationis, this is polishing and correction of faults, was done by the medieval penknife, used as a razor, thereby linking sharpened quills and sharpened nails. The connection is made crystal clear in the Anglo-Saxon glossary of Elfric, which pairs Nægel-seax, nail knife, with the term novacula, used widely for razor and raising knives in the medieval scriptorium. Both meanings of the nail knife, the literal as instrument for cutting nails, and the transfigured as a razor, are expressed in the Anglo-Saxon translation of the Cluniac sign system to indicate words by gestures without speaking. Nægel-seax is listed among the instruments for personal hygiene. Its sign consists of two different gestures. I quote, "The sign for nail knife is that you make with your index finger on your other finger, as if you were cutting, and then stroke with your finger on your cheek, as if you were shaving." Both the cutting and the shaving would also be performed with the Nægel-seax in the scriptorium, erasure of letters and sharpening of quills. It is not by chance that the fine point of the quill is ostentatiously combined with the pointing nails and the clutching claws in the depictions of Mark in the Cutbercht Gospels. I finish. In the Codex Millenarius, writing instruments are missing in the depiction of the open codices in the evangelists' portraits, but the remains of the polishing process are nonetheless present. A recent analysis of the materials and pigments used to produce the Codex Millenarius has detected iron, ferrum, on its parchment sheets, which according to the scientists who did the XRF analysis of the parchment was certainly present due to the preparation, removing of hair and polishing of the skin with an iron knife or razor. On a metaphorical level, the filing of parchment with a knife in order to erase faults, not only on the parchment itself, but also in the written text on its surface, was linked to the precious metal adornments of sacred scriptures. Bishop Theodulf, writing at the same time when the Cutbercht Gospels and the Codex Millenarius were produced, let one of his Bibles praise its donor with these words in an elaborate poem. I quote, "Whoever you are, when you see me," the Bible, "I beg, remember Theodulf, whose diligence founded me, fashioned and loved me, and adorned me on the outside with silver, jewels, and gold, and whose file polished me inside. Farewell." In the Codex Millenarius, the closed codices clutched by the beasts, studded with gold, silver, and jewels on the outside, are parallel to the words of scripture inside, framed and in the beginning of each gospel written with gold and silver, diligently emendated, polished, and tested to the nail. Ornament here is writing with a file, which sharpens the pen to a point where it resembles the claws of a falcon, lion, or eagle. The lurking danger behind this metaphor, present in Edholm's luxury critique, may explain why its literal depiction, which we see in the Cutbercht Gospels and the Codex Millenarius, never became a standard model for the portrait of the sacred scribe in early medieval art. This said, we should be aware of its long history and future transformations. Writing with polished nails and a thus sharpened pen could turn the female embellishment, this poetic muse marked and warranted for ornament fragile, into something else. scratching the surface of a text inspired not only by angelic vision, but by witty humor, from the nuns of Barking, addressed by Adhelm, to Woof and Spark, as is shown in our last image, the cover of Judy Little's book, Comedy and the Women Writer, designed by Ron Furrer in 1983. Sharpened nail and sharpened pen merge on the woman's writer's hand. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Questions, comments, observations? Rita, and then Herb. Herb, and then you can fight it out among yourselves.
So thank you. This was so much fun. So interesting. Thank you. It's wonderful just to see something that nobody's talked about. It's really lovely. So what I'm wondering is about the notion of a kind of moral corrective that's directed at the reader, not at the text, but at the reader. So one of the iconographic conventions of Grammatica, of Lady Grammar, is that she comes with a file and she scrapes the tongues of the students of all the grammatical mistakes that they might make.
Yeah.
And that's not just a corrective about the good language, about, linguistic orthopraxis. It's also kind of moral corrective that she's wielding. And I was thinking about that in Horace as well, the labor limae, which is, it's not just the polishing, but it's also a kind of deeper moral corrective for Roman writers, for Latin writers. They shouldn't be too self-satisfied. They should push themselves more. And so I wonder to what extent those images of the evangelists are pointing, the filed nails is pointing not just at the text and its perfection, but it's also meant as a kind of corrective, or it's indicating the text itself or them, their voices as it were correctives, rather harsh correctives to readers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for this question. I think, as you said and pointed out, it is a tradition going back to Horace and antiquity, where you have this pairing of two models. On the one hand, you have Horace's ideal, which is also a moral ideal of the poet who should file his poem as long as it is perfect, and who should as well file his own language and his own comportment. But on the other hand, already with Persius, this ideal of a beautification was harshly criticized from the standpoint of these Greek geniuses who don't care about their outward appearance, who don't care about laboring with their poems. It just comes naturally to them. They let their hair grow, they wear dirty cloaks, they don't care about outward appearances. And this pairing that was continuously reflected on in the rhetoric tradition, where we then have Quintilian, who criticizes those rhetoricians who would do their hair and who would polish their nails to please the audience. This critique was taken up by the Christian rhetoric in Adhelm. But on the other hand, the tradition of this well-shaved and clean, polished poet who manages to combine a jeweled style with a castigated language, with this filing of the tongue. This also lives on, and it becomes a model for not only for secular perfection, but also for a clerical perfection. And now you have these images in the Cutbercht Gospels and in the Codex Millenarius, and you wonder on which side they are. How would the reader respond towards these images? Would he see them as clerical luxury, something that is utmost decadent, or would he see it as something as the perfecting that is linked to the perfection of the scripture? And I think with this link to the writing instruments, there was a possibility to give this metaphor a positive turn. In these images, it has a positive turn. Nonetheless, it stayed dangerous. And I think that's one of the reasons. One could wonder, why was this not the standard iconography? Why not all medieval evangelists are depicted with polished nails, with silvered nails? Why was it such a singular instance in this milieu directly linked to late antiquity? And I think this is not by chance. There was a certain danger, a certain moral danger connected with this iconography.
Thank you so much. I learned to look again at these manuscripts. I have a very simple question. In the two manuscripts, is Matthew's symbol, what are his fangs, what are his claws? That is the man. Is he more like an animal, or is he more like an evangelist?
Actually, he's depicted in the Codex Millenarius as a very clean-shaven angel, just like these poet boys.
But what about his?
And his nails are not visible in the depiction. So they are beneath so he points it with his hand as a fist, so we don't see, we see him grabbing the book from below, but here we don't have an image of the nails. So he is not as the lion and as the eagle. It's a difference. He is really not displaying the nails like in those two instances where we have this comparison of the lion with Mark and the eagle with John.
David, then Bill.
And the question would be, what does this tell us? And it's difficult. Yeah, I don't have an immediate solution for it.
So I would like to thank you so much. Very just fascinating talk. I'm interested in whether, to follow out on this question, whether there are other images that could kind of test the association between polish and nobility, you know. So one way would be, I mean, I would think that if the ones who are depicted as the Greek philosophical style, that their nails would not be as cared for as the polished boy. And if there are images of other people or images of animals that are not at the level of nobility of the eagle and so on, that they might not have such nice nails.
Yeah. Actually, I think there is an ambivalence in the nail motif. Of course, nails could be judged as the utmost tool of perfection, of polishing, But on the other hand, nails also had this demonic quality mentioned by Adhelm. So when a beast grabs mice or another animal, this is of course a very raw idea of something demonic. And this association of the claw to a demonic mindset is present also in the depiction of the beasts. But with the ad unguem tradition, which we see depicted in the beginning of the manuscript with these two different styled evangelists exactly testing with their nails the perfection of scripture, we see that this ambivalent beastish iconography could be turned in a positive interpretation. And so I would not say every nail is the same, but you really have to carefully look at and consider the different contexts. And in the context of these evangelist portraits, we have a continuation of this positive oration tradition of the
Okay, well, I hold and then somebody from out there.
I want to first second what several questioners have said about thanking you for bringing a new look at very, very familiar, well-studied images. My question has to do with the strangeness of the iconography. I take it that the Cutbercht Gospels and the Codex Millenarius are the only two examples you have of this iconography. And as you point out, they're from a very particular and similar environment. But you also talked about the notion that they depend on a common model, and and do you accept what's often said that that model is late antique Italian? So we have the same iconography in two very, very different cultural environments, but only those two cultural environments, as far as we know. And I guess I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about why the iconography is, on the one hand, rare. You talked about the danger of it, but why is it occurring in these places at those times?
I think it has to do with the situation of the production of the Cutbercht Gospels and the Codex Millenarius. And as you mentioned, we see in other iconographic details of those two manuscripts that they are really closely linked to the 6th century milieu of Pavia and Monza. For instance, and that's why I wrote my dissertation on the book covers of Monza. So the first thing I was fascinated with the Codex Millenarius are those gammadie, which are depicted on the book covers and which are iconographically linked to the book covers of Monza, where you find the same iconography. And this is not by chance. I think that there was a late antique model of Longobard origin that with Luitpold, who was a Longobard princess, came to Salzburg, and there was a reception going on of those late antique ideals formulated by Ennodius in his texts, exactly in this Ostrogothic and then later Longobard milieu in the upper Italian imperial cities, Milan, Pavia, Monza. And this iconography is reflected in those two books. And why is there a link to the Lindisfarne Gospels, which is, of course, from another artistic milieu, but also in the Lindisfarne Gospels, there is a strong Northern Italian influence that Michel Brown and many others pointed out. So it is not by chance that we have these iconographic parallels between the Lindisfarne Gospels and the Codex Millenarius. It is different, I would say, and I would be interested to hear the opinion of Herb. It is different to the standard Carolingian models. Yeah.
Here we have a question from Zoom. Here's Brown.
Hi. Hi, thank you very much for the talk. I found it really persuasive and really interesting. I wanted to offer a biblical text. It's interesting that you're going to classical rhetorical authors for your comparisons for this, and I find it very persuasive. But coming from a very different kind of period, there's a lot of interest in Deuteronomy 22, 10 to 12. Which reads as follows. When thou goest forth to war against thine enemies, and the Lord thy God hath delivered them into thine hands, and thou hast taken them captive, and seest amongst the captives a beautiful woman, and hast the desire unto her, that thou wouldst have her to thy wife, then thou shalt bring her home to thine house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails.
Yeah.
What's interesting about this text is that it gets used as a standard text for images of reform and castigation. So the idea of a woman whose hair is shorn off, whose nails are pared, and it goes all over the place. And it's, in some ways, this text is behind the moment at the end of the Second World War when French collaborating women are having their hair cut off. But the image of their nails as an image of castigation, and grown nails as something that need to be pared down, these excrescences. So where I know it from is John Donne in his Satire 5 has this image of an unamended law as a beautiful woman, beautiful but long-nailed woman who she is all fair, but yet hath foul long nails with which she scratcheth suitors. So that the law has grown beyond its appropriate bounds and needs to be cut back as an image of castigation. So I really love, I suspect that this is behind some of the ambiguity that you're finding in this text.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear you talk about that more, and what a biblical text as a source for this, and how it might complicate or contrast with the stuff that you're seeing in classical authors.
Yeah, thank you very much for this point. I think you're absolutely right. And in the Christian rhetoric tradition, which I pointed out with the text of Adhelm, we of course have to consider these biblical models that were studied in addition to the classical rhetoric tradition. And it's a sort of echo of this critique already formulated by in the ancient rhetoric tradition, for instance, by Quintilian, when he says you should not use a curling iron, and you should not go to the barber to do your fingernails. On the other hand, and that's so interesting, when talking about castigation, then this filing, and you pointed out this really interesting image of grammatica filing the tongue. The image of filing is not only referring to a luxury, it could also be referring to castigation. So there is this ambivalence. what do you do when you file your nails? Is this castigation or is this a luxury? It is how you look at the nails, how the nails are formed. I mean, when we look at the portraits in the Cutbercht Gospels, the stunning nails of Luke, I would not suspect that these filed nails are castigated. I mean, from talking from the biblical example, you would say, okay, if he really is someone who is linked to the monastic tradition, he should cut his nails shorter. These are nails that are, for me, utmost luxurious items. But it is always a little bit ambivalent, and this ambivalence, I would not do it away. And the biblical examples are very, very interesting to reflect in this discussion. Mm-hmm.
Peter Salibras.
Thank you, Thomas. That was absolutely brilliant. It really was a spectacular talk. I mean, you know, many of us have seen these images before and just never noticed. I've never, you know, I just have never noticed the fingernails. It's just stunning. So just to come back to this question that Piers mentioned about the ambivalence, but also a question that Sarah Simons raised on about sculpture, just to begin with, which is there's this group of Romanesque sculptors in Hereford, the Hereford region, which are identified precisely by the length of the nails of mainly lions. And I forget whether they are, I mean, lions can always be negative or positive. You've actually got St. Mark's lion, but they're also, you're thrown into amongst the lions. So I can't remember whether you ever get images of St. Mark in that tradition with the long nails. They certainly are sometimes negative. And so for the negative size, you've got things like in a lot of anti-Jewish images, it shows them not just with goat's feet, but also with claws. So you often get sort of eagle's feet or things like that, you know, to the thing. So there is obviously a very negative image. But one thing that really strikes me about when you're talking about Horace is that when Horace is, a lot of the time, he's thinking about writing on a wax tablet. And so he's got this notion of erasure that the great writer is perfecting the whole time. And the image he uses, which Erasmus picks up, is vetere stylum, that you reverse the stylus. And so he says the great writer is constantly writing with one thing and erasing. He changed technologies to the parchment. The pointed fingernail is like the knife. It does both. It both writes like a quill. And sometimes, you know, I've actually seen, I've seen manicules where the fingernail, I mean, this is in the 16th, 17th century, becomes a quill. So sometimes in manicules, they'll actually have not only a pointed nail, but it's actually black. So it's got the black ink on it. So it's what you're writing with. So it's what you write with, but it's also what you can scratch with. And so that's a positive castigation. So it's not that your nail needs to be pointed so that it can castigate the parchment, so it can actually, you know, work on the parchment. So, I mean, it just seems to me that you've brilliantly opened up that whole question of that ambivalence of the nail, of, you know, is it, and it's also an ambivalence about whether you need to be castigating at all, because you be having divine inspiration.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. This is exactly what I was thinking about when I looked at the nail pointing in the opened Codex of Mark. Actually, it seems like he's writing with his thumb in the text, or is he correcting the text with the thumb? Actually, the thumb here really looks like a pen, a sharpened pen. I think this is not by chance, especially when you compare it with the same gesture made by the lion. It is this tradition that you later find in the images of Anita Lowe's or Ron Furr's cover design, where he really shows that the nail becomes a writing tool. The nail is exactly formed like the pen. And I would be very interested in the 16th century images of this tradition, because I looked, I searched a lot of these ambivalent depictions, or I looked for these ambivalent depictions, and if there is a tradition in the 16th century, I would be very, very interested to see it.
So going back to antiquity, I mean, if you're in a culture where writing is inscribed in wax tablets, it would seem to be obvious, I think, that the finger itself and the sharpened nail becomes a stylus itself. So do you have textual references to the poet's finger as the stylus? And in a way, the pen is the displacement of the writing instrument, which is then separated from the body.
Yeah. Actually, there is, to my knowledge, I don't have any ancient source where you can really pinpoint an instance where someone is writing, a poet is writing his conception of the poem on a wax tablet with his finger in the wax. I mean, that this concerns very much Peter and his point about the tablets.
Yeah, I mean,
God is writing with his finger, of course, but how is he writing with his finger? Is it just writing light? Is it inscribing something with the finger in the wax? Interesting questions, but hard to answer. I don't know if Peter has some ideas about this.
Peter has ideas,
but not for now. I said it. I've said enough.
yeah. And let me. Yes, I see. I mean, at the other end, just thinking about your image of the woman whose fingernail becomes the pen, the kind of negative extension now, or we've all probably been in shops where the shopkeeper has very, very long artificial nails, and the question is, how do you type?
Yes.
So that we think of it as a prevention of
I mean, this is a point that was already made in the 20s, and in all these Codex ads, there is a sequence where secretaries are shown typing with Codex polished nails, and it says, okay, this is a nail polish that really does not fade when you work. And it was very much a marketing point in the 20s for this new chemical formula of nail polish, that it would not fade, that it would hold during work, and is not only used when you go out or amuse yourself, but also when you're performing your task. Yeah, Ariel.
Jerry, I don't know if you've ever had acrylic nails before, but they make a very satisfying craft.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I actually was wondering, kind of going back to what Peter Sallybrass was saying about how the nail seems to be, when it's elongated and sharpened to a tip, a very good stylus for writing or a pen. But I think a shorter nail that's filed but still longer really mimics the knife, especially if you've ever done any kind of work like detail oriented. Sometimes you can use your thumbnail to kind of scrape stuff away when you wouldn't need something as big as, like, say, the knife. So I was wondering if it seemed to me when looking at these images that sometimes some of them have long nails on some fingers, but other fingers might have a shorter kind of. So I'm wondering if maybe that helps with this kind of dichotomy between its filing, castigation, or is it perfection?
Yes, thank you very much. This is a very interesting point to think of. And I think you're absolutely right that with the fingernails, you get both options. You can use it as a knife to scrape away something on the parchment. You can use it as a writing tool, or you can imagine it using as a writing tool. On the practical level, you could use it as a scraping tool more easily than a writing tool. I've never heard of someone dipping really his finger into an inkwell and using it to write. Would be interesting artistic project. But
the Carpi, the eccentric 16th century Bolognese printmaker, he made images with his finger that survived, that he signed, thinks it with his finger.
Very interesting.
I mean, mid-16th century.
Yeah, that opens up new new avenues of research.
Okay, we have Davida, John, Zach, and some chat. Okay.
So just if you go a little bit broader, this is not an area that I'm very well versed in, but I think just for hygiene purposes and not for castigation in antiquity in Rome, just for washing and so on, they would bathe in oil and then use these broad things to scrape their skin. And so, I'm sure that was not dissimilar from, what eventually got used for parchment and so on. And so it's, there must have been many tools like that were already in use.
Yes, absolutely. And I did not show this because it is a little bit difficult to really identify this instrument, but there were some finds of knives on the Isle of Wight, where from the 5th and the 6th century, from Anglo-Saxon graves that have been interpreted as Nægel-seax. And the interpretation says, okay, these were used for the paring of the nails. And they actually look like the novacula we find in depictions of scriptoria, that the novacula can have a rounded blade, yes. And it's not by chance that it has a rounded blade, because you have a rounded blade. When you have a rounded blade, you can apply the pressure on the skin, on the nail, or on the parchment better than with a not rounded blade. And so actually, I think that the novacula and the Nægel-seax were instruments that could resemble each other, and probably were the same instruments you would use for the nails and for erasing letters on the parchment.
Okay, John, then Zach.
So much fun. I'll be quick. Thank you so much. First of all, I can never remember a talk where everybody at the tables isn't busy studying their manicures. because you set this up this way, I think I have to ask you this question. It was beautifully shaped, your presentation, but you really did sort of raise the question of gender by your framing.
Yes.
And so I wondered if I could just put you on the spot a little more about, you know, of course, your modern examples are all about women's nails and right, our evangelists are different. So what do we know? I mean, the Lady Grammatica is interesting, I guess, and the Deuteronomy example. What else might we know about women's nail styles? Is there Roman mosaics? No.
No, I mean, absolutely, it is a gender topic, and it was already in antiquity. And with Thibault, you have some love elegies where a male lover is going to the barber to have his nails filed and pared in a luxurious way. To know a whale for the woman is, but Thibault plays with this gender fluidity, and it was the whole rhetoric tradition was playing with this gender fluidity, and therefore the nails were so interesting and important. You could read it. I mean, you could read. There is a to me. It is hard to articulate this in an objective way, but I think there is a gender fluidity in this image of Virgil and this poet boy that plays with it. And the interesting thing is some of these poets that played with it were heavily criticized because they were effeminate and they would pare their nails, and this is not what you should do. And on the other hand, it's Virgil, or it is, I mean, it's the quintessential Roman poet who here represents that what Latin style should be about. So yeah, that's the interesting thing about it. I mean, it's extremely interesting to think about this gender fluidity and how it was realized in these images.
I mean, the stoneworker who is using his fingernail to test the smoothness is presumably male and is presumably not elite, right? So I think that attempt to tie the metaphor to somebody of the working classes is very puzzling to me.
I mean, the first instance where this metaphor of the stoneworker was used was Perseus, and he uses it in a very gendered way. He says, okay, those poets who have their verses joined smoothly, just like the marble workers, where you don't seem to realize any gap. They are pleasing to the masses. He don't want to have anything to do with them. I'm the Greek style. I really can accept roughness. I can accept all those non-fitting verses that let you drop in a gutter or in a gap. And this is what you do when you're a genius. You don't care about the public. So when you please the public and when you pare your nails and when you do your hair in order to please the public, you're an effeminate poet. And I think there is this gender ambiguity. I'm not sure about the working class ideas. Looking at working class nails, there is, of course, this topos that when you do work with your hands, you have dirty nails. And this could also, this is something I want to see if there is already an ancient model for this contrast.
Yeah. And I mean, there is still the English metaphor that somebody is a gentleman to his fingernails.
Yeah.
Right? So they are clean. Zach.
Well, I mean, that's what I was gonna bring up, because when I was a kid, there definitely was a connection between cleaning under your fingernails and a kind of moral purity.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that was active, you know, if you had parallels to, because one thing that did not come up was, you know, dirt under the fingernails.
Yeah.
Images, the sparklings, especially if we imagine them silvered, would emphasize cleanliness, which would sort of make sense as what, you know, if we think of it as moral purity.
Or in orthopraxis equals moral purity.
Yeah, I think that's very much at play with the portrait of Poet Boy. Why are the fingernails so white? They are white flashes. So this has to do with cleanness, and I think there is this idea that you care about your appearance, that's important. And yes, it would be interesting to see if there is in the monastic tradition some positive images of dirty nails, so that the anchorite or someone who is going and
But with painted nails, you don't know whether they're dirty.
yeah.
Hides it. It's when you don't do anything
Yeah.
to your nails that it shows.
Okay, Nick, and then Peter. Peter wants to return.
Thank you, Thomas. Obviously, you stimulated all of us. I was curious, sort of wanting to bring things back to sort of actual scribal practice and sort of bibliophilia, and I was thinking of Richard Bury, the 14th century, you know, on the love of books, and I don't know if there's mention of nails in particular, but certainly dirty fingers. And I was wondering if, you know, in sources like in Theophilus, you know, manuals on artistic production from the Middle Ages, or in Chenino a bit later, you know, what is when nails are mentioned in our artistic practice, when we have, you know, information about or scribal manuals, things like that, and whether there's some connection there, you know, talking about manual labor and
I think that's an avenue that would be worth looking into, and also really exploring what is written about nails in these artistic manuals, and if I did not do too much research in this avenue, but I think it could be very promising, and you probably working with your fingers, the nails are an important part, and you do lots of things with your nails when you do handicraft. I mean, so it should be mentioned there. And from the scribal practice, it's interesting to see how the pen was held. There is a lot of discussion on this topic, and how exactly you use 3 fingers and how you pose those 3 fingers. I was very surprised that a source for this could be these Cluniac manuals on sign language, where you should not talk, and then you show some signs how you do things, and one of the signs is pen. So how do you show pen? And pen you show with 3 fingers, posed in a certain way. So there is also this link to when you ride in the air. Yeah, that's what I would do also. How would I show riding? I would ride with my fingers with an imagined band, and that's very interesting.
So comments from the chat, and then Peter Stallybrass will have the final question.
There's just two questions from the chat I'll bring up one by one. The first comes from Sarah Simons. Do you see the same attention? This is Peter referred to this a while ago. Do you see the same attention to nails in Roman sculpture?
Yes, and that is what Dangur's avenue of interpreting Horace's quote was. Actually, en inuchi is this expression used in the canon, the most famous antique, ancient manual on sculpture. And there it means you should care about the nails when a sculpture is cast. So this is an element that shows that the sculptor really is up to his task, up to the nail. So he will form the nails of a sculpture as perfect as it can get. And this is something also very interesting to think about. Yeah.
Thank you. And then a question from Barbara Williams-Ellertson. She asks, several of the evangelist portraits include bejeweled, treasured bindings, presumably without the dangers of vanity in the aesthetic beauty. Can the book be beautiful without the complexity or ambivalence of an adorned scribe?
I think there is this ambivalence, and this ambivalence of inside and outside is very much at play in the quote of Theodulf. I think it's absolutely interesting to think about the cosmetics of the scribe and the cosmetics of the book. And there is this link between those two fields, and that is something I stumbled across also looking at contemporary nail art. So you have those incredibly beautiful manicure sculptures, as they are called, where you put on your nails, diamonds, and other jewelry. And when you look at these nails, you think about book covers. And of course, it's only a random association, but also not so random in these images of the Codex Millenarius, where the nails are one element of the decoration of the book cover itself. And there is a play between the nails as jewels and the jewels on the book.
Peter, last question.
Thank you so much again. I mean, there's so much there. But one of the things that you've been talking about is the cosmetics, and it seems to me that that's such an interesting area that is also about the rough and the smooth. And so the rough and the smooth, it'll go through into the whole art history tradition that Vasari contrasts. You know, Venice is color as opposed, and it's bad. So it's bad compared to Florence because it's all about color. And so I'm wondering, you know, to what extent the whole, you know, iconoclastic element is about painting itself. I mean, all paintings, even paintings of evangelists, are potentially bad from that. So there's an ambivalence there already. Are they just colors? You know, that what you want is the pure text, the pure scripture without any illustrations. And I'm thinking that within painting itself, it goes through. One of the things I thought was so fascinating about what we were talking about, the rough Greek versus the smooth Latin. And that would be a repeated motif, it seems to me, for, you know, Petrarch, for instance, would curl his hair because he was absolutely the smooth man.
Yeah.
And so he wants to look, and he wants his portrait painted, he wants to look like a smooth person. The other extreme is that when Caravaggio painted the first St. Matthew was replaced, he shows a clearly illiterate St. Matthew who can't write. And so he's sitting with these very working class, the legs were what was objected to. He has these incredibly muscular legs. And then the angel, who is incredibly smooth, I mean, absolutely beautiful, very difficult to tell if it's a boy or a girl, but the angel leans across and literally guides his hand. So the hand is being guided by the angel. So there you've got the rough and the smooth conjoined just in the images you were showing, you know, in the single writing image. So although, you know, Matthew, but there the emphasis is that you don't want anyone to write because this is God. So if God writes, then the evangelist shouldn't actually need to castigate. They shouldn't need to erase because if it's really God's writing, it's the writing of God. It should be perfect first time round. And so that seems to be a tension within the whole history of Scripture, that the history of Scripture is bound up. Everybody knows that actually people have to write, you know, so it's how you write the Torah, someone has to write it. At the same time, there's the imagination that God should be the writing instrument and should be pure inspiration.
Yes, absolutely. And it would be a fabulous book title, The Rough and the Smooth. So I think you're absolutely right. It should be written, the book, The Rough and the Smooth. And you could take a new look at the art history from the Roman period until contemporary art under this lens. So yeah, absolutely agree.
Okay, with that agenda for all of us.